Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emily Davis, and I am a member of the Main Street Wadsworth Board and am currently chair of the Design Committee. Main Street Wadsworth has been working with the Perspectives architecture firm and the State Historic Preservation Office to place Wadsworth on the National Register of Historic Places. We would like to thank you all for attending today's meeting to learn more about these efforts. We are honored to be considered for this designation and to have the opportunity to protect the history of downtown Wadsworth. And it is my honor to introduce today's speakers to you. First, we have Elizabeth Corbin Murphy. Elizabeth is a principal of Perspectives Historic Architecture Studio. She is dedicated to preservation and restoration, technology, and design. Her specialized talents often overlap with the academic, government, hospitality, and healthcare market sectors. As past president of AIA Ohio and past chair of the AIA National Historic Resources Committee, Elizabeth is a strong advocate for the architectural profession. She serves as a professional peer for the GSA Design Excellence and First Impressions programs and frequently speaks at historic preservation conferences. Next, we have Alice Sloan. With over a decade of professional historic architectural experience, Alice's career consists of working closely with the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service in the preparation of National Register nominations for state and federal historic tax credits. She can contribute to any phase of a project, but she has expansive knowledge regarding preventative architectural conservation, which she uses to prepare restoration and preservation plans, technical building assessments, and history community design guidelines with Perspectives architecture. Next, we have Barbara Powers. She is the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer and Department Head for Inventory and Registration for the State Historic Preservation Office of the Ohio History Connection. Barb has 40 years of experience with his historic survey in the National Register of Historic Places programs in Ohio. Next, we have Petra Knapp. She is a survey and National Register manager in the State Historic Preservation Office. Before joining the inventory and registration team, Petra was a senior architectural historian for GAI Consultants, Inc., and earlier served as an AmeriCorps Community Survey member at Cleveland Restoration Society. And with that, I will turn things over to Elizabeth to get us started today.
So good afternoon, everyone. We're so glad to see you. Sometimes we have these meetings and only 3 people show up. So I'm thrilled to see all the interest from the City of Wadsworth and the people who do business here in the township. Now, the slides seem a little gray because we have sunshine come in, and while I could apologize for the gray slides, I don't want to apologize for the sunshine. It's well needed here in Northeast Ohio. But I will tell you that if anyone is interested in getting a PDF version of what we show today, we do have a sign-in sheet here, and you can put your email address on it, and we're happy to send it to you. I encourage you to take notes, do whatever you like, and at the end we're going to be here as long as you like to answer questions. So let's see here. Does that get us going? This is what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the National Register of Historic Places and what it means to be listed in the register. We'll talk a little bit about the process of doing this. And then we're going to talk specifically about Wadsworth's historic district and the architecture and the significance of the architecture here. And we have a whole section here for questions, and we will look forward to discussing them with you. I think that we're going to have Barbara Powers start because she can tell you all about the register. She's been doing this for lots of years, and she's just really good at explaining things. So welcome, Barb.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm happy to be in Wadsworth, and I'll echo Elizabeth's comments about happy the sun's shining, and that I had a very dry and uneventful trip up here as well from Columbus. So it is great to see such a large crowd. Just show of hands, how many people are actually property owners within the proposed historic district boundaries? Great, great. You are the people I'm happy to and look forward to talk with and share with you information about what the National Register is, what it isn't, and how the process works, and where this particular proposed historic district is within the nomination process. So Petra and I, we work with the State Historic Preservation Office, and we are, as mentioned, a division of the Ohio History Connection, otherwise formerly known as the Ohio Historical Society. We're based in Columbus, Ohio, and we are the official state historic preservation office for the state of Ohio. And as such, we carry out a number of programs and help Ohioans preserve historic properties. Most of the programs we oversee and administer are coming out of the National Historic Preservation Act. But as an office, we work with folks who are preserving historic buildings. We assist in the review of federally funded projects. We identify historic properties through historic and archaeological survey, and we nominate properties to the National Register of Historic Places. And that is the program we are talking about today, the National Register of Historic Places. The National Register is the official list of properties worthy of preservation because of their significance in American history, archaeology, architecture, engineering, or culture. As I mentioned, the National Register was created through the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act. And that act set up that state and federal process for administering the program, and it also created the National Register of Historic Places, which recognizes significant places at a national level of significance, state level, or local level of significance. And basically, the National Register, as we'll learn today, tells property owners, interested groups, elected officials, citizens, that you have places worthy of preservation within your community. But for the most part, it leaves the decision-making of what that means to your specific property, to you as a property owner, up to you and up to the local decision makers within the community. As you can see, we have over 4,000 listings in the National Register, and some of those have multiple properties in them. So we have over 50,000 historic properties throughout the state, in every county of the state, listed in the National Register. And we're closing in on close to 600 historic districts listed in the National Register of Historic Places. So as we go about working with folks who are preparing National Register nominations, there are 3 basic ingredients that make an area or a property eligible for the National Register, and one is age. Typically, properties are 50 years or older to qualify for the National Register. Sometimes there are exceptions to that general rule. And for any specific property, and today when we refer to properties, we can interchange that with historic district. there's always what's called the period of significance. There is always a specific time period that is associated with that nomination that is the time period that is illustrated through the history and significance of the proposed area that's being nominated to the National Register. Significance. Properties, why is the property important in history, architecture, or culture? For the National Register of Historic Places, the National Register has what are called the National Register criteria for evaluation, A, B, C, or D. A is associated, if a property qualifies under criterion A, it's because they are associated with important events or important patterns of history that are reflected within the properties being nominated to the National Register, that tell an important story about the local history and development of an area. Criterion B focuses more on individuals who have made significant contributions and the properties associated with them. Criterion C is associated with architectural significance, whether it be properties representing significant, noteworthy examples of architectural styles or method of construction or engineering techniques. They would fall under that, qualify under that National Register Criterion C. And Criterion D focuses on properties that have the potential to yield important information. Typically, those properties are archaeological in nature. So to qualify for the National Register, a property or an area may meet one or more of these four criterion. And it's not like if you meet all four, you're really, really significant. It's more what is the most appropriate criteria in which to evaluate the history, the significance, the story that your area has to tell. And lastly, the third ingredient, all are equally important to making for successful National Register nominations, is historic integrity. The National Register is really about place-based history. And in saying that, I mean that to qualify for the National Register, a place has to retain key historic features, his physical features that help to convey its significance. And those features are judged through these 7 aspects of integrity: location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. And that is all based on why is the area significant in the first place. And then what are those significant character-defining features that have to be in place, those physical characteristics that help it tell its story. Historic integrity is also grounded in the understanding that all properties change over time. So National Register designation doesn't mean that a property has to be frozen in time or go back to an earlier time period, but as I said, it means that it's a weaving of all these 3 ingredients into telling the story through a National Register nomination documentation of why the area is significant, what are its historic characteristics that help convey that significance and that time period, and why is it significant? Why is it worthy of preservation? So when I talk about properties, talk about listings in the National Register, here's just the examples of what can get listed in the National Register that make up those 4,000 listings we have here in Ohio. Individual buildings can be listed in the National Register, or structures like remnants of the Ohio and Erie Canal Lock or bridges are listed in the National Register. Sites like the Mill Creek Park in Youngstown, a designed landscaped park, is a site listed in the National Register, or objects like the Toronto World War I monument over in Jefferson County. And what we're talking about today, historic districts. By definition, a historic district is a significant concentration, linkage, or continuity of sites, buildings, structures, and objects that together reflect historic significance, or they reflect a physical plan or physical development of a community. So historic districts, again, are this collection of historic properties that together convey significance and convey significant story about the history of a community. And as we can see here, historic districts come in all shapes and sizes and flavors. We can certainly have downtown commercial districts, like what we're talking about here in Wadsworth, listed in the National Register. We also have residential neighborhoods listed in the National Register. College campuses, again, significant groupings of properties that related historically together, are listed in the National Register. And we even have an entire township, rural township, over on the western side of Ohio in Miami County that it conveys a significant concentration of historic farmsteads that were retaining their historic buildings, barns, outbuildings, farmhouses, but also land configurations, rural roads, fence lines, and other aspects that together really showed and was a snapshot of the historic agricultural character and history of that particular community. So within a historic district, there's always a boundary that encompasses what is being nominated to the National Register. And the National Register nomination itself will document and convey the applicable National Register criteria, talks about areas of significance, and talks about that period, that time span associated with the historic significance of the area. Also within that boundary, as I said, districts are concentrated collections of historic properties. So within those boundaries, the majority of the properties contained within the boundaries are going to be what we call contributing properties to the National Register. That means they were built or existed during that historic time period, that period of significance, and they add to the history and the architectural significance and the character of the district. They help to tell the story of the history of the district. Also, within any boundary, you're going to have some properties that are called non-contributing properties. And that's because they were not built during the historic time period, or they have been so changed or altered that they no longer really convey a historic appearance to be able to add to that understanding of the history and significance and physical appearance and characteristics of the district as a whole. And so with the National Register program, as I said, you draw a boundary that's that most cohesive collection of those historic properties versus sort of jigging and jagging and avoiding if there are any non-contributing properties within the district. Also, it's important in any district to understand that relationship of buildings to one another and how they help tell that story and their relationship to one another, the setting, landscape aspects of features that help to convey that historic character, along with architectural details, which often are signage and other features and aspects. So this just shows you the proposed historic district for the Wadsworth Downtown Historic District. And Alice is going to tell you much more about how this is being proposed, the boundary delineation, the historic significance, and how it meets National Register criteria, under what criteria, and a little bit more about the history and development. But I will suffice it to say that the growth of Wadsworth and its downtown commercial center is linked to the development of local industries and their role in the industrial growth of the surrounding region, including nearby Akron. We're looking at a predominantly commercial industrial district that reflects the impact of historic industry through the development of a commercial, social, and cultural center of the community, which is being nominated. So, nice, Barb, but what's this all mean for me as a property owner? So what? So, I always like to start by talking about what the National Register doesn't mean, because perhaps this is the most important slide of the entire presentation. Simply put, the National Register listing does not affect property owners' rights as a property owner. Listing in the National Register places neither restrictions nor requirements on a private property owner. You may do with the property as you wish within the framework of local laws and ordinances. The National Register listing should not be confused with a community's local ordinance that may set up design review. The National Register may be an impetus for initiating local guidelines, or it may not, but it is not a direct result. That's not a direct result of National Register listing. Through National Register listing, you are not required to maintain the property in any specific way. You may demolish the property as long as federal funds are not being used. So again, National Register listing is not going to change your rights as a property owner. It doesn't prevent you from remodeling, repairing, or altering, selling, or as I said, even demolishing the property, and it doesn't obligate you to make certain repairs or improvements to the property. So, what the heck does the National Register do? The National Register does provide some benefits. Remember, I talked about it recognizes your property as being worthy of preservation. So it does set up some benefits and some aspects to that listing that help you, if you choose to take advantage of them, possibly preserve the historic property. Ultimately, the National Register really is intended to be a planning tool. It's intended to be an educational tool. When properties within a community are recognized in the National Register, property owners, local decision makers know what properties are significant and can use that information to make informed decisions. There's also a sense of pride and recognition by being worthy of preservation because of your historic and architectural significance. Adding to the significance of a historic district or contributing to the historic character of the community identifies significant historic local properties and helps raise the awareness of their value and the value of historic preservation. Often, National Register documentation is used further on for local programming or to create walking tours or other educational tools or devices that just help raise awareness locally and for visitors of the historic significance of your community. A little more tangible, income-producing properties. So we have a lot of those in the proposed historic district, and those are properties that are either commercial or residential rental that are listed in the National Register or are contributing properties within a National Register listed historic district. They may qualify for state and federal historic tax credits for rehabilitating the historic building. Now, the use in Ohio of these historic tax credits is a very widely used and very popular tool for reinvesting in historic properties, in communities, and to spur and encourage economic development within a community. So again, that is a benefit of listing in the National Register if the property owner chooses to take advantage of that benefit. And if you do choose to take advantage of applying for either the state Ohio Historic Preservation Tax Credit or the federal Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credit, then you'd be working with our office and the National Park Service, because in taking the tax credits, there are guidelines that the work must meet, and those are they're called the Secretary of Interior Standards for Rehabilitation, but they're really basic common sense guidelines on how to retain historic character of the property, but obviously put it to new use or continue the use it has and take advantage of those historic tax credits. So again, the work is reviewed by our office, it's reviewed by the National Park Service in order to achieve the acquisition of and being able to take advantage of the historic rehabilitation tax credit benefit of listing in the National Register. A routine part of all planning for projects that are receiving federal funding or require a federal permit or a federal license is to take into consideration how that federally funded project is impacting properties that are listed in the National Register or that may qualify or determined eligible for the National Register. And this aspect of how the National Register factors into this is all part of what's called Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. But I think it's always important for folks to understand that what triggers the review of how a historic property may be impacted by federal funding is the use of federal funding. It's not the fact that the property is listed in the National Register. This review and the coordination of those federal funded projects and their impact on historic properties with our office, the State Historic Preservation Office, that takes place whenever federal funding is involved or a federal permit like a FCC, Federal Communications cell tower permit, or project funded by the Ohio Department of Transportation, whenever those projects take place. So the first question that's always asked is this project going to impact properties listed in or eligible for the National Register? So that's where that planning tool comes in. If properties are already listed in the National Register, you've already answered that question, and you can proceed to figure out whether the project's what we call adversely impacting the historic properties or not. And if it is, how to mitigate those adverse impacts, how to move on, how to possibly reshape the project, or how to determine what type of mitigation is going to be sought and achieved through the project. If the properties are not listed in the National Register, that question has to be answered. It has to be determined whether or not they qualify through the National Register criteria, retain historic integrity. So again, when properties are listed, that's a strong planning tool for local communities, for federal agencies to be able to appropriately plan for the use of federal funding for properties. So National Register process. Anyone can nominate a property to the National Register, and we say that, I say that, oh, sorry, I forgot we had these little preludes in there. Anyone can nominate a property to the National Register. And that means that you don't necessarily have to be the property owner to nominate and prepare a National Register nomination. However, the National Register program builds in a notification process, and that's exactly what I'm doing here today with you, and that is to inform property owners about the National Register, the proposed nomination, and what it means and what it doesn't mean for you as a property owner. Every National Register nomination goes through really a three-part review process. National Register nominations are prepared by groups like Prospectus, and the nomination is the nomination materials, which includes let me take a moment to sort of tell you what we're talking about when we're talking about National Register nomination. It's actually a document that has a narrative that physically is describing the properties included in the nomination, and also then a narrative that talks about, gives the history and the significance, and talks about how the properties the area meets the National Register criteria, what the period of significance is, how it conveys historic integrity. And then that's all supported further by historic images, mapping, current photographs of the nominated area, and of course a current map showing the boundaries and identifying those contributing and non-contributing properties. So that material comes to our office. We have a 60-day review period, and Petra Knapp was the staff member who reviewed that material to make sure it meets the age requirement, whether or not it qualifies and supports the National Register criteria it's being proposed under, and whether or not it has historic integrity, and that has been explained and demonstrated through the nomination. Next step is properties then are, nominations are scheduled for review by our Ohio Historic Site Preservation Advisory Board. That is our state review board. Every state in the country that has a state, every state has a state historic preservation office like ours, who do exactly what we do, nominate properties to the National Register. They all have state review boards. Ohio's is a 17-member board. The members are appointed by the governor, and they are architects, architectural historians, archaeologists, and public members from across the state, and they convene 4 times a year. They look at every nomination that's being proposed in Ohio to the National Register, and they advise our office, the State Historic Preservation Office, about, guess what? Whether or not that property, that nomination, each of those nominations meet the age requirement, meet one or more National Register criteria, and have historic integrity. So after the board has made their recommendations, then our office does a final review of the nomination, and we then sign it and send it to the National Park Service. And at the National Park Service, we have a reviewer who looks at every one of Ohio's nominations, and her name is Lisa DeLine. She's a historian. She will look at that nomination and determine whether or not it meets the National Register criteria, it falls within the appropriate age, and it has historic integrity. So I sound repetitive, but I try to reinforce that those are the key ingredients that really shepherds and are looked at and examined throughout this process as to whether or not a nomination is going to actually get listed in the National Register of Historic Places. And then it's at that federal level that nominations are actually entered into the National Register. Now, you all might be sitting there thinking, well, golly gee whiz, she's talked about all these other people that review this nomination and have a say in it. What about us? What about the property owners? Well, that's right now. That's where you all come in. We are in the notification process comment period for this proposed National Register nomination. And our office has required steps we take in order to ensure that the local community, the property owners, are made aware of this proposed nomination. And these are all outlined in the National Register federal regulations. So, first, let's start with, we have a district that contains more than 50 property owners. So that right there sets into place a certain steps in the notification process. First step, that is between 60 and 30 days prior to the State Review Board meeting, which is actually March 17th, when this nomination is going to be considered, we send a letter to the chief elected official, the mayor, explaining that the area is being proposed for National Register nomination, explaining what that means. We also, at that time, we set a public meeting date that we will come to Wadsworth, as we are right now today, and talk to property owners. We also are required to post a legal notice that appeared about 2 weeks ago in the Wadsworth Post. That again explains the areas being nominated to the National Register, what that means, what that doesn't mean. Essentially, that legal notice said everything that I'm saying to you today in my portion of this presentation. So this is the opportunity for property owners to comment about the National Register nomination. We certainly can get you a copy of the National Register nomination as it exists right now, so you can comment on that and express your opinions about it. And property owners have the ability to comment in support or in opposition. And if a private property owner wishes to object to the National Register, the proposed National Register of Historic Places nomination, then they should do so in writing, and the letter needs to be notarized, and that's because that assures and proves that you're actually the property owner of that property. And I'll explain how all comments, all letters of support or opposition where there should be addressed to and how they should be sent to our office. Again, we welcome comments, we welcome your input, and this is exactly this roughly 30 days now from now until March 17th is the time for you to provide your input and for us also to answer your questions. Now, there's a couple things to think about. Again, what is being nominated are not a bunch of individual buildings in this particular in a historic district nomination. What is being nominated is the district, the entire collection of historic properties within that boundary. So within that nomination, we obviously have multiple property owners. And if a majority of the private property owners actually end up objecting to the listing in the National Register, the National Register nomination will still go through that process, review process that I just outlined. It'll still go before the State Review Board. For their recommendation, it would still go to the National Park Service. However, it would not be listed in the National Register. It would be evaluated to determine whether or not it qualifies for the National Register. Now, that's the scenario if a majority of private property owners would just decide to object to the National Register listing. Of course, the National Register is set up that the responsibility is on the people who are not in favor of the nomination. So it's not that we have to have a letter from every property owner to proceed with the nomination, but that option for property owners to weigh in is a part of the National Register program. And you might be wondering, well, why does she make such a big deal about this won't be listed but will be determined eligible? Well, it does make a difference. If you recall, when I was talking about the benefits of National Register listing, and I talked about particularly the historic preservation tax credits, also often properties can qualify for grants, actually grants that are bricks and mortar type funds for their property. Those often require National Register listing as a prerequisite for applying for the grant funding. So that's all talking about properties listed in the National Register. If a nomination is merely determined eligible for the National Register, none of the property owners within the district can take advantage of the historic tax credits for their property because the district is not listed in the National Register, unless your individual property might qualify on its own for the National Register and you'd have to individually nominate it. However, if you remember when I was talking about the use of federal funding or a project that might receive or require a federal permit or a federal license, I always talked about the review of that project is looking at the impact of those federally funded projects on properties listed in or eligible for the National Register. So again, that process that's triggered by the use of federal funding or federal permits or licenses, that takes place regardless of whether or not the properties are listed in the National Register or merely determined eligible. And again, does the National Register freeze, is that status frozen in time? The answer is no. If in the future, a majority or property owners would change or property owners would change their mind, nominations can always go on to get listed in the National Register. I want to mention that two things. One, the majority of properties in Ohio are listed in the National Register. So again, we're here to help answer questions, your questions, help you understand the process, and so most importantly, help you understand what it means and doesn't mean to have a property listed in the National Register, be a part of a district listed in the National Register. So, dates to think about. This nomination will be considered by that state review board on March 17th, Aaron go bra. And the meeting is an open meeting, public meeting. It's held at the Ohio History Center that's in Columbus, Ohio, 800 East 17th Avenue. And letters of your comment letters, letters of support, letters of objection should be sent to the State Historic Preservation Office, Ohio History Connection, 800 East 17th Avenue, Columbus, Ohio. You should address them, you can address them to Bert Logan, who's currently the State Historic Preservation Officer. You can address them to me. You can just address them to State Historic Preservation Office. Be sure you get that address. That information is on our website. There's cards here. There's also handouts about, again, that covers everything I've said in today's presentation. And right there's mine and Petra's emails. If after the meeting you've come up with another question, please feel free to reach out to us about the National Register process, the National Register program, or any comments you have to share. So, Historic District. Now so again, this is the National Register program. This is the program, this is the process that's followed for every National Register nomination, whether it be for an individual building or historic districts like we're talking about today, whether that historic district has 10 owners, whether it has 50, or whether it has 2,000 owners, which we have some districts, large residential districts that do have that many nominations or property owners making it up. So again, I'm sticking around. I'm turning it over to Alice, who's going to talk more about specifically the proposed district here in the Wadsworth Downtown Historic District, but I'll be around afterwards to answer anybody's questions. So thanks again for coming. Thank you for allowing me to share this information with you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Barb, for that wonderful educational session. Very thorough. I even learned some aspects that had to be, I'd be refamiliarized with, so thank you. My name is Alice Sloan, and I'm with Prospectus Architecture. Elizabeth Corbin-Murphy is also with me today, and she might be interjecting with some fun facts as well, as she often likes to add color. I just want to say that I have the fun opportunity to say how remarkable your downtown is and how much joy I've actually taken in getting to know it and writing about the buildings and learning about your history. So I'm going to discuss the overall history of Wadsworth's core and highlight the various architectural styles of the buildings within the district, just some samples. I'm not going to keep you here too much longer, but just some highlights. So this red outline shows the boundary of the Wadsworth Downtown District. It roughly encompasses the buildings on High Street on the north of the center, and then Main Street on the south, and it's from Maple Street on the north to Pine Street on the south. So I guess I should probably point that out, right? Maple is up here somewhere, and Pine Street is down here, and then on College and Broad Streets, so College and Broad, we have Party on the west and Lyman on the east. All right. The Wadsworth Downtown Historic District is the commercial core of Wadsworth. It is primarily a collection of 19th and early 20th century brick and frame buildings with a few residences, a church, a school, and industrial sites. The district is approximately 43 acres and has nearly 60 contributing resources representing the period dating from 1863 to 1967. This period from the 1860s to the mid-20th century covers the period when Wadsworth was growing into an industrial city fueled by entrepreneurs and industry which leveraged natural resources such as wood, coal, salt, shale, and stone in and around Wadsworth. The story about Wadsworth is associated with commercial and industrial history and contributes to broad patterns of history for the area in Ohio. Unique to the district is that on the south end, there's not only a school building dating to 1907, but also large industrial properties on each side of Main Street. Recognizing this district helps our community retain the story for future generations and identify for others the historical significance of Wadsworth's downtown. So here are just a couple great shots. The first photo on the left here is looking along Main Street, looking south, showing the 1884 Italianate-influenced Pfeiffer building and the 1866 Italianate-influenced building next door. So on the right is the industrial property on the south end of the district along Main Street. It's an early to mid-20th century collection of buildings. Okay, here's a very brief history. You might already know this. Wadsworth's history. In 1814, settlers arrived in what is now Wadsworth from Vermont and central Pennsylvania. At that time, Wadsworth was part of the Connecticut Western Reserve and was owned by General Elijah Wadsworth. The area was representative of the American westward movement of pioneers arriving from eastern states to begin farming the lands. The town of Wadsworth benefited from products made or mined from natural resources in the township and inventions associated with those natural resources. Wadsworth also benefited from its location along national rail lines, connecting Wadsworth to large urban cities, including Cleveland, and then beyond New York and Chicago. The period of significance begins in 1863 with the arrival of the first rail line, which was the Atlantic and Great Western. Aaron Pardee was elected the first mayor in 1866, and Wadsworth was incorporated as a village in 1868. The growth of Wadsworth and its downtown commercial center is linked to the development of local industries and their role in the industrial growth of the surrounding region, including nearby Akron, and it's made possible by the interurban, which operated from 1907 to 1933, and of course, the automobile. So this period from 1863 to 1967 includes the development of the downtown businesses and the Ohio companies, including Ohio Injector, Ohio Match, and Ohio Salt, whose manufacturing and/or headquarter facilities are included within the historic district boundary. The period of significance ends in 1967 when local control of the Ohio companies ceased due to consolidation with national firms. The image on the right shows Wadsworth Square circa 1908. In the foreground, right here, there was still a horse water trough around the stump of an elm tree. The streetcar came from Akron and Barberton in 1907 and backed into High Street Park to pick up passengers and workers for the Ohio companies. The streetcar was discontinued in 1934. So notice there's only a few cars in 1908, and look at all these, we're calling them lines of hitching rails for horses on this downtown street. But on the left-hand photo over here, this is from 1944, and it's an image of South Main Street showing a bustling downtown with many cars. Okay, just some architectural highlights for you. I'm not going to go over every single building, although they're all pretty great. The architectural stylistic influences in Wadsworth downtown are varied from the late Victorian, which we include such stylistic influences as Italianate and Queen Anne. So an Italian example is in here. I had a close-up picture of these earlier. You remember that little blue building and the Pfeiffer building and the building next to it. Those are Italianate. And they, the influences also are shown in the revival styles of the neoclassical. You can see the far right here, the Wadsworth, we're calling it the Wadsworth Trust and Savings Company building from 1931. And then there's even Tudor Gothic, as in the church that's included. There is also an example of the modern movement where the 1958 First National Bank built a new office next door to us here and shown over here in this photo of Huntington. To establish the construction dates of buildings, we reviewed historic photographs and Sanborn insurance maps, and we looked for clues on the existing building itself. And of course, we consulted with the Wadsworth Historical Society. I see Roger Havens is in the audience, so I just want to point out and acknowledge his great help. In the next few photographs, I will highlight a few key buildings and their styles and organize them by building type, which is commercial, residential, institutional, and industrial. Oh, I forgot to tell you, even though you probably already know. So this is a view looking south on Main, and this is a view looking south on High. Okay. The existing buildings on High Street were constructed beginning around 1898, many with retail businesses on the first floor and residential or offices on the upper floors. On the left is just part of that 5-bay building, commercial building, constructed in 1905 with Romanesque and Gothic revival influences. It's known as the Myers Block. And note the characteristic pointed arch window heads and rusticated ashlar stones. So here's the pointed arched window heads and the rusticated ashlar. On the right, we have another image, just looking slightly different angle that I've shown you before, looking south on Main Street. Now we're looking, I guess, west at the south part of Main Street. These buildings were constructed during the mid and late 1800s, and even as early as 1874, the gray one here. The earliest buildings have Italianate stylistic influences, such as hood molds and 2/2 wood windows. So here's the hood molds They're gilded, or they appear to be gilded over here, and then the 2-over-2 windows. There are also buildings from the turn of the 20th century and up into the 1920s, such as the First National Bank building here, which is terracotta, and it's a neoclassical revival, and it dates to 1925. So just looking at these buildings as an example, they housed hardware store, menswear, boots store, pharmacy, bank, and the Oddfellows. So, various uses as you would see in a commercial core. And as an aside, also, the buildings on College Street to the northwest also fall into these same periods, with some buildings into the 1930s. So more uses, historic uses, would be an A&P store, a diner, restaurants, bakery, dry goods, jewelry, electric company, and gas company, and laundry. So now looking at residential buildings represented in the district, as an example, we have the Johnson House, which is now the Wadsworth Historical Society and Museum, over here on the right. And then on the left, we have a duplex that is associated with early worker housing for the Ohio companies, and it dates to about 1900, according to Sanborn maps. And as far as institutional buildings represented in the district, we have the school, the central school, neoclassical revival style influences, which it was dates to 1907, and it has an addition to the south constructed between 1914 and 1922. On the very north of the district boundary is a brick and stone church constructed in 1919, to your right here. It was called the Grace Evangelical Lutheran Church, and it's still called Grace Lutheran Church. And this is an interesting fact. Both Mr. E.J. Young and Dr. Everhard of the Ohio companies were lifelong members of Grace Evangelical Lutheran Church and involved with the affairs of the church. Both men contributed large sums to the building fund for the 1919 church. And then, of course, for industrial, we just have one example here. On the far south end of the Wadsworth Downtown Historic District is the Ohio Injector Company. And these buildings were constructed over many years, from 1922 to 1942, although the water tower dates to 1902, but between 1902 and 1908, we're not quite sure from the Sanborn maps. And then the powerhouse, so this is the water tower, right? Obviously, and then the powerhouse is over here, and that dates to 1919. So that was a whirlwind. I could get more and more, give you more and more details, but I just want to say that this is a very exciting collection of buildings that you have, very special in downtown Wadsworth. And the district is significant at the local level for its association with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history in terms of commerce and industry. And the district reflects the impact of industry through the development of a commercial, social, cultural center for the community. And the district is further strengthened by the fact that industrial sites are included within the district boundaries. So thank you very much for your attention. That was a whirlwind. And now we will take your questions and comments. Although, Elizabeth, you might want to read that quote. Or Barb.
Okay. The National Register encourages citizens, public agencies, and private organizations to recognize and use the places of our past to create livable and viable communities for the future. So we are not here to encourage you to just save old. We want your old stuff to be new and vibrant all the time. And so we encourage you to support the district. Now, we are stopping. We're not going to lecture anymore, I promise, but we are here to answer questions. And again, if anybody needs a PowerPoint PDF, they should just let us know, and we'll send it.
Sure.
So I saw two different things up there. Will letters actually be sent out to the business owners, or they have a public meeting instead?
Like I said, when there's the junction is if there's less than 50 property owners, our office sends an individual letter to every property owner. When there's more than 50 property owners, which is what we're talking about, we come to you and actually talk with you in the public meeting, and we post that legal notice, and we've sent a letter to the mayor. So those are our notification steps when we're talking about a larger historic district. Yes?
What's your last name and position within Ohio History?
Oh, okay. My last name is Powers, P-O-W-E-R-S, and I am, ready for this? We'll be here all night. Got a big, long title. I'm the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer for, I know. Yeah, my card's on the table, for inventory and registration, which means I work with the National Register.
Could I ask that you repeat the questions at the microphone?
Oh, sure.
So we can hear it on
Okay.
the television recording.
Oh, okay. Well, the first question was about the letter process, notification process.
So we're still going to answer questions, but I just wanted to add one thing to what Barb said. She talked about one of the advantages of being listed is that you can avail yourself of the historic preservation tax credits, both at the state and federal level. What she didn't tell you is that the state tax credit is up to 25% of your qualified expenditures, and the federal is another 20%. So if you're investing in your property, you can get as much as 45% back. So that is really a big advantage.
So coming off of that, we talked about the property owners and tax programs. What about non-commercial property owners that fall within the tax increase radius created by the historic district? What programs are available for residential people to get the same recovery and assistance? What about renters who are going to see their rents go up because the property values go up because of the tax program?
Okay.
What federal programs and state programs are here to assist?
So if it's a rental property, that's commercial income producing property, and you can use the tax credits.
The rentee or the building owner?
Well, the building owner, however, there are ways to do that. Some of them are a little more convoluted, but the lessee can apply for the tax credits.
But a regular person living in an apartment downtown, what do they have to assist them in rent increases and displacement?
Well, first of all, I think you mentioned something about the tax increases that come. Well, again, the National Register designation is not going to increase taxes, local taxes. It's just not, it doesn't do that. What we're talking about with these rehabilitation tax credits is a tax credit on the applicant's income tax. It's a credit against the work that is done, the cost of the work that's done, that's rehabilitating the property and reusing.
For investing into the property.
Right.
So if you're an apartment dweller and you're living in an historic property, your landlord has incentives to keep that property up to date without raising your taxes, because the landlord can reduce their expenditures by use of these tax credits. So it's supposed to encourage people to stay there, not chase them away.
And again, both of these historic tax credit programs we're talking about are purely voluntary. They are if the property owner decides to take advantage of them, and if they make sense for their particular circumstances of whether or not they are rehabilitating their property and other factors. It's a benefit of listing in the National Register.
There are no programs available for private or renters like there are for the building commercial property owners. There's no assistance programs that you are aware of.
Well, not through the National Register of Historic Places.
Right. So just so everybody heard that, the question is, are there any incentives for the apartment dweller as opposed to the apartment owner? So the programs, there's no programs directly through the National Register. There are lots of grant programs, and I don't know them all off the top of my head. I'm really quite an expert on the tax credits, but there are other incentives that can be, a lot of them through the city. You know, the city can apply for HUD funding. The city can apply for grants through the Ohio History Connection for fixing up the properties that people dwell in. And there are other property tax, not tax incentives necessarily. Some of them are grants, but I just don't know the whole list right now.
Right, and again, they may or may not be associated with the historic character of the district. I also, and Elizabeth's right, there are other grant sources. Our office administers the Ohio History Fund, which again are funds that may be used by nonprofit organizations to do projects. They don't all have to be physical bricks and mortar projects on historic properties. They also can go to creating exhibits, creating walking tours, doing other aspects of promoting the history and significance of the historic district. And there has been much talk about over the years at the federal level about initiating a similarly structured historic tax credit for residential properties, but that's not an official legislation right now, but it gets introduced about every Congress, every year, every congressional session.
Right, I think we're closer to a federal residential historic tax credit than we've ever been. Perhaps. But if you want to influence that, talk to your federal reps. Tell them how important it is to you. But I really appreciate that you bring up that question. It's really important because it's a constant discussion among those of us in planning and architectural industries to talk about whether or not the increase of property values chases away residents. And it's a really big problem in greater urban areas where we tear down some old historic houses and put up a high-rise, and the person who lived in that historic house can't afford the apartment in the high-rise. So it's a good discussion to have, and it's a valuable question to raise.
I'll ask the question. If a private property owner opts out by submitting the notarized letter, is the line redrawn around that property?
Well, again, as I mentioned, what's being nominated is the entire district. So if a property owner objects to the listing of the nomination, then that objection is sent with the nomination to the National Park Service. But if there's not a majority of property owners, it doesn't really change the outcome of the nomination. And unless it's shown that the boundary is not valid in that it does not reflect the historic significance and the historic integrity of the district, it's not going to be changed to try to avoid the property owners objecting property owners. And again, I stress that the logic behind that is what we've just been saying, that the National Register doesn't place restrictions on you as a property owner. What we're talking about with historic tax credits or grant applications, those are all things that a property owner chooses to do that are made available through the listing.
If the owner chooses not to be a part of the whole process,
then if you're not going to ever, take advantage of any of the benefits associated with the National Register, it's not going to change your your role as a property owner at all. I mean, there's, like I said, almost 600 historic districts listed.
But the line will still be there. The line says this is still a designated historic area. So even though I opt out, I am still under the program of the historic area because that's how the map
Well, you're
is
still
drawn.
within those boundaries, because your objection is saying you object to the listing of the area in the National Register, not that you're objecting to.
So if you write letters of objection, they go to the Ohio Historic Sites Preservation Advisory Board. And all of those things are considered, the boundary outlines, the significance, and the descriptions about which Alice spoke, and all of the rules about which Barb spoke. Those are all considered at the state board level. And those 15, 20 professionals will read every single nomination, look at the districts, look at all of the photographs and every single objection. And they will take all of that into consideration. And they do have the ability to change what is presented there. But if they don't, then the line stays in the same place, and your opt-out is to never take advantage of any of the...
And the State Review Board advises our office, and as I stressed, the State Review Board's charge is to see whether or not the property meets the National Register criteria, and whether or not it has integrity,
Right.
which is what the Park Service will do too. We will take seriously all objections and all the reasons why the objections are being conveyed to us. But again, I can't stress enough, there are many, many, many properties that are listed in the National Register, and again, the property owner, they're just listed in the National Register. The property owner has never taken advantage of any of the programs, but nor has anything about the National Register changed their role and their ownership of that property. So I know I can't stress that enough, and we talk a lot about the National Register. It's a better carrot than it is a stick, and I'll be honest with you about that. It's not going to make you do something.
So are these weighted per building? So there's some buildings downtown that are literally 250 square feet, and others like Jay's is 600,000. Are
Right.
they weighted the same?
Yes, and that's a very good question. I'm glad you asked.
Oh, yes, we want to repeat the question. The question is, is there more significance given to a small building than a big building, and are they weighted the same?
Right, and the answer is each property owner within the district has one voice as a property owner. So it doesn't depend on how many properties you own, or it doesn't depend on how large your property is or how small your property is. You're one property owner amongst all the other property owners. So your letter of support or objection is from you as the property owner. So it doesn't matter if it's a large property or a teeny small property, or a contributing property or non-contributing property. It's all the property owners whose properties fall within those proposed boundaries. And to your answer, yes, boundaries do change, can sometimes change for the National Register. But often that's driven by whether or not, again, the charges that we're required to look at is the significance and integrity.
Yes.
Just some logistical questions. When was our application submitted and who nominated it?
Sure.
So we were hired by Downtown Wadsworth, Main Street Wadsworth, sorry, Main Street Wadsworth. And so we, from Prospectus, filed the nomination on their behalf. Yes.
So a part of being included or not being included in the historic district for the individual owner, how do we stop the formation of the district? How do we stop it like 17th meeting? Not objection letters or not objection letters. How should one be inclined to put the brakes on the whole thing until a little more sussing out can be done? how do we do that? Can it happen?
So right now, this project is set to go before the Ohio Historic Sites Preservation Advisory Board on March 17th. The best way to stop that is to write a letter to the board, or to Barb, or to because the objection has to be in writing.
You're objecting to our office, actually, and we need to receive it by the 17th. So,
Yes.
So you mentioned there are more than 50 property owners in the district. How many are there?
That's a question for Main Street Wadsworth.
do we have a representative from Main Street Wadsworth here?
Yeah.
I think it's around 62.
Okay.
So I guess I hear conflicting information about objecting. So I hear that is the criteria that is a straight majority for the objection, or if but the other part was you listen to all the objection. Which is it? Is it that those objections are taken, or is it?
So the question is, are we listening to objections now, and does that make a difference, as opposed to writing a letter?
No, that's not my question.
No.
No.
The question is, does it factor into whether or not
Is
it
the criteria
qualifies? No.
for stopping it purely based on the 50% or more majority? You have to reach that criteria.
The answer is yes.
For there to be an objection, or could there be one or two objections that you would consider and say this is worthy of stopping this, or is it strictly based on the criteria must be met at 50%?
Oh, okay, so that's a good question. The question is, can we stop it if there's only 2 objections, as opposed to stopping it if there's a 50% chance? If the nomination is properly written, and if the nomination meets all the criteria for integrity and description of, all the criteria that's going forward for a National Register nomination, then 2 objections would not stop it. If the objections that are raised call into question what was delivered to the Ohio Historic Sites Preservation Advisory Board, then they could, at the very least, put time on it.
And when she says that, I think what you mean is whether or not you're saying this doesn't meet the criteria, it doesn't have integrity. I mean, again, that's what those boards' charge is to consider those factors. Again, the State Preservation Office, we don't initiate National Register nominations. Nominations are brought to us from entities that are proposing to prepare National Register nominations, and then we work through the process. So we're right now in the process of notification and hearing your comments. If the local community decides to make a decision to change what they're doing with nominating the area, that's their decision. Well, that would be up to them to do that, not the state, not our
So I
office.
will say that this is the 3rd time we've been here. We came and presented on what is the National Register prior to Main Street Wadsworth deciding to do this. And I don't know what their process for making decisions was. I don't know if there was more discussion in their meetings and how open that was. But we also did another public meeting at the beginning of this process to ask, for input and to explain what was going on. So this isn't the only meeting that the only public meeting that we've had, and we have reached out. We have done walking tours with people invited, and so we really have done quite a bit of open process work to this point. And so I think objections, we would really like to hear if we've done anything wrong in our process. But the objections from all of the districts that I've worked on so far, if a nomination goes in, having gone through this open of a process and have been done correctly, and they meet all of the criteria, it does take the 51% to stop it.
Well, because again, we're obligated to process National Register nominations. And as I explained, our process is outlined in the National Register regulations. So if there is a majority of private property owners objecting, it's still going to go to the State Review Board. It's still going to go through that review process at the National Park Service. It's just it would not be listed in the National Register. It would be evaluated and determined eligible, and I think I explained the differences between those two things. And so again, and you know, oftentimes I'm at these public meetings and it's at this junction when somebody asks the question, well, why would we object to the listing? And so again, I know we spend a lot of time explaining how someone goes about objecting to the listing and how they get that voice heard and what it means and what the program and the process requires with that decision to object. And that's because it's important. It's important to the process. But again, we're also here to hear what your concerns are and why why you have concerns. And again, what we're here to do is tell you what it means and what it doesn't mean. And that's what I can tell you and talk about from, like I said, 40 years of experience working with communities all over the state of Ohio, big, small, and in between. Now, again, what I can't control are the factors outside the National Register program, but I can tell you what the program does and doesn't do. So, open to questions. Keep them coming. Yes.
I was just going to ask if you could go back to that slide that shows all of the things that the National Register does not do, because I feel like a lot of the concern maybe is coming from some of those.
I suppose I could have.
And just to recap, these are the things that it does not do.
Right. Yeah. Again, it doesn't put controls over your property. And I can tell you, go ahead.
Based on what you said that the National Register doesn't do these things. But that doesn't hold the city from wanting things done.
But
that's what you said.
Yes, yes.
So I think that's why some of us are wondering.
But that is a conversation.
Is being opened here.
Well, that's a conversation you have to have with the city, because I can't stress enough, the National Register listing doesn't, just like it doesn't make a individual property owner do things to its property, it doesn't make the city do anything either. It doesn't make the city automatically start initiating local legislation. The National Register doesn't, that's not going to happen on the day the National Register area is listed in the National Register. Local legislation, local ordinances, those are local processes of which our office and the National Register program doesn't have anything to do with. So again, those are conversations that need to be done with.
Have you seen a municipality change the way they do business because now they have the National Register symbol and they want to bring all properties up to a certain level?
Well, I have seen that communities may, again, remember I said the National Register tells you have something worthy of preservation. And I've seen communities who have worked with their property owners to take additional steps beyond that listing that may put into place design review or may trigger, a number of programs, maybe some kind of assistance program to help give mini loans to property owners to fix up their properties. Those are all decisions that are made at a local level. They may be encouraged or prompted by the fact that, hey, we have a historic district that is worthy of preservation. But they're never done without, or they're never done well, without the input of property owners working with a local community, with your local government. And again, That is not what I'm here to talk about, because I have no role in that. And the National Register, as I said, may spur someone to make those decisions and take those steps, but it's not automatically going to make that happen. And I have no idea whether the City of Wadsworth has, what their future plans are, but that's a conversation for them, for you to ask the City of Wadsworth about. But yes, sometimes it does.
So there are a couple things that you can take advantage of once you're listed. For instance, the Ohio Building Code has Chapter 34 that deals with existing structures, and it allows you as an historic building to use a discussion with the building code official to meet the intent of the law instead of the letter of the law. So for instance, the code says you need a 36-inch wide door and your doors are 34. But once you're in a historic structure, the building code official can say, okay, you don't have to change it. And so we have found that in the architecture biz to be really, really beneficial.
But that is an Ohio law. That's not being,
and so that's nothing that comes of being in the National Register, but it's another advantage of being listed.
Right.
Barb's right. Every community treats this action differently. And I know in the city of Shaker Heights, you now have to get your paint color approved before you paint your house. But that has really... Yes, that's right. They historically had to do that. But, there's nothing in the National Register that says that. That's how the community looks at themselves. And all of you are members of this community, and all of your voices should be heard and should have something to say with how your community treats their status. What I like to tell people is, the worst thing that can happen from being listed in the National Register is that if you tear your property down, they're going to delist you. I mean, that is the absolute worst thing that can happen to you because of the National Register.
It's just that building, right?
Yeah, just that building.
Not the rest of it.
That's right. That's right. Well, if the majority of the buildings came down, yes, but...
We've seen that happen.
Yeah.
I laugh and we all chuckle, but there are districts listed in the National Register in which there hasn't been any interest moving forward, or the property owners that were interested had moved on or sold their properties, and sometimes those, decisions are made and properties come down, and they do, and they're listed on the National Register. So I guess I use that as an example to show that, again, the National Register there's nothing really all that mysterious or magical. It's a tool. It's a tool to help you make decisions for the future. It's a tool if you want to take advantage of it as an individual property owner to take advantage of some benefits if you're thinking about rehabilitating your property or making some improvements to your property. It's a tool for community, local nonprofit groups to possibly pursue for some projects that will benefit in furthering the history and education of the history of Wadsworth. But it really is meant for you to make those decisions about it. That's what it was designed for from the get-go. And actually the historic tax credits is a program that didn't come into being until 1976. The National Register existed was created in 1966. So it's a program that grows over time with interest and trying to seek benefits and develop benefits that are for the benefit of the people whose properties are within that district. Yes.
I have a question. I'm not a property owner. I'm only here for information. But who gave Main Street Wadsworth the authority to apply for this?
The question is, who gave Main Street Wadsworth the authority to apply for this. And that's not a question I can answer. I mean, like Barb said in her presentation, anybody can nominate a property to the National Register. And so I do not know what impetus Main Street Wadsworth have, except to help everybody on Main Street and a High Street to have another tool to bring business and tourism into town, to, you know, just, their intentions were to help every property owner in town, so, especially on Main Street. So I don't know what their charter.
I'm not faulting that this was done.
Yeah.
I'm just curious as to, did the city council vote to allow her to do this?
So I don't know what the relationship is between Main Street Wadsworth and City Council? Sure.
So I don't know, is there anybody here on the board with Main Street?
Behind you, yeah.
Should have spoken up. Yeah, so there is no relationship in that sense. The city council had no idea about this, other than if you own the building, you got the same that anybody else got legal bills. So city, this is not a city.
Right. There were city council members at our earlier meetings, you know, so.
Not a city council.
Yep.
Not what we do.
Yeah.
I think this is beneficial to our community and for business owners personally, but I know one of the concerns that I think some of the folks are talking about is anytime you get local and state government involved, rules change, which could put regulations and stipulations on property owners. So the question I would have is, once we become the registry, can you ever get out?
So if the question is, if you're ever in the National Register, can you ever get out? I think you can get out by tearing your building down, but it's not. Let's see.
Well, I can answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
Probably each property owner could get out personally if they.
No.
That was your original question.
You're listing, the district is being listed in the National Register, and once it's listed unless, I keep going back to, but it's purposeful because that's what guides us, unless those factors that I explained that makes the property or makes the district eligible in the first place, if those would change, then if for some reason all the buildings would, well, if there'd be a huge amount of demolition that would no longer, so the district no longer had conveyed its character, the area where that happened, there may be a revisiting of the district and the boundaries could change. You could make the boundaries smaller. That happens. Historic districts are amended because there has been a loss of the historic fabric, or if again, if there's some change to how the area conveys its historic integrity or how it reflects its significance, or if for some reason on down the road there's been some re-examination and the historic information that was used to base the significance on turns out to be misinformed or inaccurate, then that again can trigger a reassessment of the National Register nomination. But that's why it's being listed, for its history and significance. Yes, you, and then I'll.
Okay.
Oh, okay, sure.
My question is a little bit off the beaten path. What, if any, connection does the Ohio History Connection have with the Ohio Board of Tourism for helping to generate additional tourists and foot traffic into the downtown area?
Sure, that's a good.
I'm a business owner and I thrive on organic foot traffic.
Yeah.
So that is my primary interest.
Sure. The question was, what the relationship does the Ohio History Connection have with the Ohio Tourism Board of Tourism? And it's that we do work with them as a whole, And again, our office has some funding sources that can help encourage the use of grant monies for projects that may booster tourism. I know the Tourism Bureau is very interested in historic places and historic properties and promoting those historic places. I think overall there's a lot of an interest in Ohio, throughout Ohio, in the fact that people like to go to places that have historic character. They like to go there, they like to visit, they like to spend money there through eating and buying things and shopping in those places. And again, that is an intangible aspect of the recognition that you have, hey, we've got this place that's listed in the National Register, and that can be used to promote your town as far as tourism and encouraging more visitors and people to come visit the town. And it's a kind of a badge of recognition that you're going to go this place and there's going to be historic character. It's going to have some aspects to it that make it attractive, make you want to seek it out, make you want to learn more about the history and significance of it. So that's, again, that's the educational part of the National Register designation and the building awareness about the history and significance and character of your community. Now, we had two other questions.
Okay, I just want to add on just to that just a little bit. The statistic from the National Trust for Historic Preservation is that people go to places for a vacation in a certain order. Do they have a beach? That's number one. And do they have historic sites? That's number two. And that is the same across the entire country. Now, where we are here in Wadsworth, we don't have a beach, so we might as well take advantage of what we do have. And you might also find that there is funding from some of the tourism bureaus, and you might encourage Main Street Wadsworth to set up that kind of connection. Maybe they can get a speaker in here from the tourism bureau to engage you and find out what can be done on a smaller level. And I know that the Heritage Ohio does a lot with tourism and does a lot with Main Street. And Wadsworth was awarded last year, right? And at Heritage Ohio Conference for the initiation of some of their programs. So I encourage you to participate with that.
I have a question. I'm sorry to jump over your comment.
Okay.
But it kind of piggies back on what you just said. The perceived added value of all this extra tourism, in addition to the actual projects that are done to improve the properties. In commercial areas like this that you've worked with, do you have any data on the increase in property values?
Okay, so do you?
I do not.
Okay, so property values have been doing this over the last decade, and even if I did have stuff, I don't think I would say it out loud. But I would encourage you to go to Donovan Ripkema's website. What's it called?
Place economics.
Place economics. Place economics. He's been writing for 3 decades on the economic advantages of historic downtowns.
Right. And the National Trust for Historic Preservation, as well as more closer to home, Heritage Ohio, the statewide Historic Preservation Office, I think they all have sources and studies that look into that very question. But again, no, I don't have
and
those.
engage the county visitors bureau as well.
Well, that's true. That's initiative. Say, hey, look, we've got this. Our district is now listed in the National Register. How are you going to help us? How should we promote this? So that's a opportunity that can be a potential opportunity for you too through the National Register listing. Now, this gentleman and the lady in the back have been waiting with their questions.
Maybe you can walk me through this one more time. If I send a letter in and ask to opt out of the program, it doesn't change the fact that I'm still in the program, does it?
Right. You're still in the district.
I said since the very beginning when I was presented with this that I have no interest in
Okay.
And it looks like from your map, nobody listened to what I said. And I know I talked to multiple people from Main Street Wadsworth, I'm not trying to draw people to my business. I'm not trying to draw any attention to my business. I just want to keep doing business the way I am.
Right.
And I don't want to be impeded in the future, and I don't know what kind of impediments were going to come from being a part of this, so I want to opt out completely. I don't want my area in the map.
Okay.
It's not that important to the grand picture of the other 63 people that want to be here. So I'm not understanding why, even when I say, and I send my notarized letter in with my grievances, that I'm still going to end up in the program.
Well, again, you have the right to send in those objections and send in those grievances, and we will take them into consideration. I can't stand here today, I wouldn't be doing my job if I said, sure, we'll take your building out of the district and we'll take everybody's building out who's objecting, because that's, again, not the way the National Register program is designed. It's designed to focus on the history and significance of the area and that cohesive collection. It furthermore then is designed to not change a property owner's rights as a property owner.
That's only on your level.
Right, well, that's the only level I can control.
Right, and from where I'm sitting, your level looks great, but I can't predict the future on a local level, but it's not going to change.
Well, I can't predict the future either, but I can remember the past. And I've worked with a lot of communities that, again, they've gone through this National Register process, and they're not out there wildly changing local code or local design reviews. There's districts that have been listed since the early 70s, and they don't have a local design review board, or they don't have anything like that. Again, your community could set those things in place regardless of whether or not the area is listed in the National Register, because it's all a local decision. It's a local ordinance that would be creating. So it's really, that's the conversation. I mean, what's your community want to do with their community? The National Register is one tool, but it's not local legislation. It's not legislation at all. It's a designation that is telling you.
So if we went away today and did not do this, we still can't stop whatever the local people are going to do.
Well, I would agree with that, but on the same hand, the local people would be less likely to do something if there wasn't a new initiative with 63 business owners that voted yes, and not heard the one who doesn't want to be a part of it. It's not that I want to vote no, I'll vote yes for it right now, but it's tough owning the worst house on the street. Do you understand?
Oh, yeah, yes, I do understand.
But again, the National Register is focused on the history and significance. And I can tell you, I mean, again, Wadsworth is part of, a big piece of Ohio's history. This, which is actually unique to Ohio. If you bear with me for a moment, for me to geek out on my Ohio history and what makes Ohio so phenomenal. Ohio, from the late Civil War to to World War II, really, through that late 19th through the early 20th century, Ohio was such an industrial force and such an industrial kind of balance between its agricultural prominence, but this industry was really what drove Ohio. And Ohio is unique among most states in the country in that most states maybe have their state capital and then they have one or two major historically industrial centers. Ohio had like 5 to 8 major industrial centers: Cleveland, Cincinnati, Akron, Youngstown, Dayton, Toledo. But then it had, and this is where it comes in, and this is what makes our state so unique, then it had all of these medium to smaller communities that had these incredible industrial bases. And those were major players in the country and really international industry and manufacturing and that growth and prosperity that defined the country at that time. And that's what's really distinctive, is these communities like Wadsworth, like Barberton, like Marion, Ohio, like my hometown, Bucyrus, Ohio, like Canton, like Springfield, Ohio, all these medium to smaller sized communities that had this incredible industrial base, and out of that industrial base came prosperous downtown centers, cultural amenities, schools, educational facilities, and that's what the National Register is recognizing, is that history and significance of the community and sort of how it's all woven in together. But I can't, I mean, I know you're probably thinking, well, she hasn't heard a word I've said. I've heard every word you're saying, and I do respect it, and I understand it, but I'm just trying to help you also understand the program and the parameters of the program, and really stress the fact that what the National Register is and isn't, and that's again what I can do. And certainly, please, I urge you to share your comments and share your concerns with us, but know and understand and hopefully hear what we've been saying today about the fact that the National Register and precisely what it is and what it will do and what it won't do. And it seems to me like some of the factors that you're proposing are things that are well beyond my control and well beyond the control of the National Register, and are more local issues to express concern over. And as I said, I'm not going to stand here today and tell you the boundaries would be changed. Obviously, this is, though, the point of this is comments on the proposed district, how it meets the criteria, why it's significant, what people's concerns are, and those will all be taken into consideration and looked at. But typically, the nomination, the program focuses on that history and that integrity. So I would be misleading you if I told you otherwise. So, but decisions can be made too that may alter that. I think there was.
No, she was waiting way back there.
Oh, okay.
Actually, it's been answered, but maybe I can just reiterate. And I can be here, it's a very educational process here. But to your point, and to what you're stating as far as city function versus National Historic Register, in my tenure, there's been, I'm going to say, tweaks to various things, whether it be signage or paint palette, I think you had mentioned, and that sort of thing. And those are done in an open forum, but that is something that is, like, say, done on the city end. And I think that's what you're stating is that you don't have control over something like that. That's more of a city type decision. But I think the point that I wanted to make is that was not triggered due to having a historic district. That's something that a city chooses to do with comments and with working together with various partners. So I think that was the main thing is that you've already stated it. It's been kind of discussed, but it's not triggered because of that. I just wanted to bring that up. And then just as much as, there's several individuals that are involved with city government that are here today. In 20 years, when none of us are here, we don't have a crystal ball because somebody might say, well, we prefer this paint palette or something. So I think what you're stating is that things can change. You don't have the ability to enforce one way or the other. That's a local issue. But I think my main point is that I don't believe it's triggered due to one or the other. Just wanted to mention that or clarify that, I guess, because that was just a little bit of a question.
Okay. Yes?
First of all, I want to thank you ladies for your presentation. It's very clear, and I really appreciate that. if we want the slide deck, if I put my email address, is that all I need to do, or is that?
Sure, I mean,
Maybe just,
make a star that says,
Yeah.
if anybody puts a little star, we can send you the PDF of this.
yeah.
So we're not sending it to everybody, or we can send it to everybody.
Yeah.
And you had also mentioned that we could see the application.
Yeah,
So is that the same way we would put a star?
Yeah, why don't we do that, you guys can send them.
Yeah, so put a star if you want this, and put 2 stars if you also want a copy of the National Register nomination.
Right, and more towards the end of February, it'll also be available on our website, through our website.
Right, because it is all public information.
Right.
Once it's turned in to Barb's office, it becomes public information.
But we can send it, they can send it, it can
Yeah.
get to you ahead of that time.
Is this information that can be put on like Main Street's website?
Sure.
Has that been done? I don't know. I know there's some folks from Main Street here.
We can list it probably on the projects, and then this would be the National Register projects. and
So-
every information.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some edits being done to the nomination. My recommendation is that the version that the board is going to see is the one that you should be commenting on, frankly. Let's
Yeah.
address some of our review comments, which again, all go to supporting National Register criteria, integrity, those factors. That's what we review these against.
So Emily, we were taped today, is that correct? Is that available for people?
Yes.
Okay.
It's on watchwctv.com.
Okay, did you hear that? Watch
CTV.
watch WCTV, okay? So,
The street executive director could compile all this information after today, including the
okay,
information.
that would be easier.
Exactly, we can blast that to all the building owners.
Okay, so we'll send it to Main Street Wadsworth, who will make it available.
If you send it to Adrian, I can talk to Adrian, he can.
That's what she's saying.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. So we'll send it to Main Street Wadsworth, then anybody can look at it.
Right.
Yeah,
Including the link to this session.
yeah.
And our website has more information about what I explained about the National Register program. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your good questions. And
Yeah.
also, we often get these kinds of questions, wide variety of questions when we do public meetings, and that's what we come here for.
Yes, so Petra wants to address you just a bit.
I just want to say one thing. I'm so sorry. I just want to say one thing. Something to keep in mind, whether you're a resident or a business owner in this town, how many of you remember what downtown Akron looked like in the late 90s? How many of you went to downtown Akron in the late 90s? It was scary. And so when you start having more interest in your downtown, you start seeing improvements. How many people go to downtown Akron now? Because they have events, people are more aware of what they have down there. And that's all this is. It's just to make people aware of what you have, whether you live here or whether you want to visit here, and whether you want to make money on people who visit here. It's all about taking pride in your community. And, Akron in the 1990s, downtown Akron, nobody took pride in downtown Akron in the 1990s. People who worked there got out of town as quickly as possible at 5 o'clock.
Except me.
Except if you work down there and, But that's what this is all about. This isn't about, taking anything from anyone. Okay? So just wanted to put that in there because I'm from Akron and I went to high school downtown Akron, and I am fully aware of what it looked like then and what it looks like now because people took an interest. So just something to keep in mind. Thank you.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.